She was only 16 years old, and that motel room was the only place that didn't ask questions. Maddie stood trembling in the doorway, clutching her tiny baby girl to her chest. The dim yellow light flickered above her head, casting tired shadows on peeling wallpaper. The air smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness, and it mingled oddly with the sweet, comforting scent of her infant daughter's hair. Tears slid down Maddie's cheeks, invisible to the sleeping child who nestled innocently against her heart. She had barely anything with her: a backpack containing a few diapers, a change of clothes, and crumpled dollar bills she'd saved. Each bill held stories Maddie didn't want to remember. Days spent hungry, nights spent awake, promises whispered but never kept. But here, in this small roadside motel, she hoped to find just one night of safety, one night without fear. The motel clerk had eyed her suspiciously but handed over the key without comment. Room 8. The number felt heavy in her hand, a weight of uncertainty and hope tangled together. Maddie knew that tomorrow held no promises, but for tonight, she had a door she could lock. Across the parking lot, illuminated softly by the neon vacancy sign, stood a silver Mercedes. Maddie briefly wondered who would stop at a motel like this, driving a car that screamed wealth, loneliness, or perhaps both. She caught sight of the occupant briefly, a man older than her father would have been if she'd known him, face stern, eyes distant as if looking far beyond the cracked pavement. She shook off the curiosity, too exhausted to wonder about the lives of strangers when her own felt like a thread unraveling. Inside room 8, Maddie laid her baby down carefully on the bed, then curled up beside her, watching her daughter's gentle breathing until her own eyes grew heavy. If you've ever felt that the world gave up on someone too soon, then sit here with me a while, my dear. This story is about lost babies, found hearts, and a second cradle. Maddie awoke sharply to the cries of her daughter, panic instantly tightening her chest. The clock beside the bed blinked 2:13 a.m. She tried soothing the tiny girl, rocking her gently, murmuring soft words she wished someone had once spoken to her. But the cries didn't cease. They grew louder, echoing through thin walls. A sharp knock at the door made her heart stop. Fear surged, wild and raw. Who would be knocking at this hour? Was it the motel clerk regretting his kindness? Or worse, had someone come to take her child away? Gathering her courage, Maddie wrapped her baby protectively in her arms and slowly opened the door just a crack. Standing outside was the man she'd glimpsed earlier, the one with the Mercedes. Up close, he looked older, lines etched deeply around eyes that seemed to carry stories he didn't wish to tell. "I heard the baby crying," he said softly. His voice was gentler than she'd expected, his eyes tired but not unkind. He held a small grocery bag awkwardly in his hand. "Thought you might need some help?" Maddie hesitated, unsure if trust was something she could afford. But desperation outweighed fear. She opened the door wider, revealing the sparse room, the half-empty backpack, and her swollen, weary eyes. "I don't mean to bother," the man said quietly. "Just milk and diapers. My mother always said babies only cry when they're hungry, wet, or scared." His words were simple, but the tenderness in them almost made Maddie cry again. She reached out tentatively, accepting his offering without words, their fingers briefly touching. The man's eyes softened further as they rested on the tiny infant. "She's beautiful," he whispered, voice catching unexpectedly. "Thank you," Maddie replied, her voice barely audible. "Her name is Grace." At the mention of the child's name, something shifted in the man's expression, a sadness surfacing and retreating just as quickly. Maddie noticed but didn't understand. She was too tired to guess at hidden pains behind the eyes of strangers. Yet, for the first time in a long while, Maddie felt seen, not judged, just acknowledged. The man stepped back, ready to leave. He paused once more, glancing toward Grace with an unreadable emotion. "If you need anything else, I'm right next door. Room 9. He walked slowly away, and Maddie closed the door softly behind him. As she fed her baby comforted by the quiet that finally filled the room, she couldn't help but wonder why a wealthy man in a lonely motel would have sadness so deep in his eyes. As dawn approached, Maddie drifted to sleep, haunted gently by the memory of that brief touch and the echo of sorrow in a stranger's eyes. And then she awoke again, this time to silence broken Not by Grace's cries, but by a quiet sobbing drifting through the walls. She sat up, startled. The sound wasn't from her baby. It was from room 9. The sobbing from room 9 drifted softly through the walls, like a secret confession whispered in the quiet dark. Maddie sat up in bed, holding Grace close, the baby peacefully asleep and unaware of the world's complexities around her. It was strange to Maddie that a man who seemed so composed and gentle could be quietly unraveling alone in a motel room. She pressed her ear softly to the thin wall, not out of idle curiosity, but because her heart recognized pain when she heard it. It was a sound she knew well, one that she'd muffled countless times under blankets or behind bathroom doors. The ache of loneliness, of guilt, of regret. Before she knew what she was doing, Maddie was standing at his door, her hand raised, poised to knock. Her fingers trembled, suspended between courage and hesitation. What comfort could a 16-year-old mother offer a man old enough to carry a lifetime of memories she could not even imagine? But sometimes courage was just compassion, without second guesses. Maddie knocked gently. The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so thick she could feel the heartbeat of hesitation through the door. When it opened slowly, she saw him clearly for the first time. His eyes were red, face marked by tears, shoulders heavy with a burden he had been carrying alone for too long. "I heard you," Maddie said softly, not knowing what else to offer but honesty. "You helped us earlier. Maybe I can help too." He stared at her, emotions flickering across his face. Embarrassment, surprise, relief. He opened the door wider, silently inviting her in. The room was tidier than hers, yet the air felt heavier. A small photograph lay on the nightstand, face down, as if hiding from painful reminders. Maddie sat quietly on the edge of the bed, cradling Grace, while he sat opposite her, searching for words he wasn't sure he could speak. "My name is Jonathan," he finally said, voice roughened by emotion. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you." "You didn't," Maddie replied gently. "It's just that I recognize that sound. I've made it myself." Jonathan's eyes softened at her honesty, and he nodded slowly. He glanced toward the photograph, hesitating a moment before picking it up and turning it gently in his hands. "It was taken 25 years ago," he began, his voice thick with regret. "I was young, careless, a different man." He handed the photograph carefully to Maddie. She saw a younger Jonathan, smiling uncertainly next to a woman with tender eyes holding a baby. Maddie felt her chest tighten. "Your family?" she whispered. "My greatest mistake," Jonathan confessed softly. "I wasn't ready to be a father. I abandoned them, believing it was best. That child, my daughter, grew up without me. I've spent years trying to find her, to make things right, but it seems fate punishes those who run." Maddie's heart ached deeply. Here was a man haunted by abandonment. His own. He had given kindness to her without judgment, yet carried judgment upon himself with relentless cruelty. "Have you ever found her?" Maddie asked softly, holding Grace closer. "No," he replied quietly, sadness dripping from every word. "She disappeared, leaving behind only questions." Jonathan took a deep, shuddering breath, steadying himself. His gaze moved to baby Grace, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You remind me of her," he whispered. Young, scared, alone, and yet stronger than anyone could see. His words hit Maddie like gentle rain after a lifetime of drought. She had never considered herself strong, just surviving. But Jonathan's sincerity made her see herself differently, even for a brief moment. Jonathan rose, stepping closer to Maddie. He looked down at Grace, tenderness overtaking his sadness. "Perhaps it's not too late for you both." Just as Maddie was about to reply, a sharp ringing filled the silence. Jonathan's phone vibrating harshly on the nightstand. His expression shifted instantly, concern clouding his eyes as he stared at the caller ID. Maddie felt the moment slipping away, replaced by tension. He answered, listening intently for only seconds before his face turned pale. He ended the call abruptly, eyes filled with alarm as he looked at Maddie. "Someone knows you're here," he said urgently. "They're coming." Maddie's blood turned icy. Her heart began racing, panic rising in her throat. Who could possibly know? Was it her past finally catching up to her? Her hands shook violently, causing Grace to fuss and whimper softly, sensing her mother's distress. "Who?" she asked desperately. Barely able to form the words, Jonathan glanced nervously toward the window, pulling back the curtain slightly to peer outside, his eyes scanning the empty parking lot as if expecting danger to arrive at any moment. His calm had vanished, replaced by protective urgency. "A woman claiming to be from social services," he explained, his voice tense. "But she knew too much. Your name, Grace's name, this motel. Something didn't feel right." Maddie's mind spun rapidly, replaying the months of running, hiding from shadows that always seemed one step behind. She clutched Grace tightly, terrified at the thought of losing her daughter, the only family she had left. "We have to leave," Jonathan declared decisively, surprising even himself with the certainty in his voice. "I won't let them take your child from you." Maddie stared at him, overwhelmed. "But why would you help me?" Jonathan hesitated, struggling briefly against memories that shadowed his eyes. "Because I once turned my back on someone who needed me. I won't make that mistake again." His sincerity gave Maddie the courage she needed. She nodded quickly, grabbing her small backpack, and followed Jonathan out into the night, trusting her instincts for perhaps the first time in her life. Jonathan unlocked his silver Mercedes, swiftly ushering Maddie and Grace inside. The engine purred softly, masking the pounding of Maddie's heart as they sped away from the motel, leaving uncertainty behind but carrying fear with them. Maddie watched the neon sign grow smaller in the rearview mirror. Her breaths came unevenly, and she gently rocked Grace, trying to soothe them both. But her thoughts raced chaotically. Who was searching for her? Why was Jonathan risking so much for strangers? Questions filled the silent car, but neither spoke, each wrestling privately with their own fears. After an hour, Jonathan pulled off onto a quiet road, leading to an old, elegant house partially hidden by trees, warm porch lights casting inviting pools of amber glow. "This is my home," he explained quietly. "No one knows this place. You'll be safe here." He opened the door, extending a hand to help Maddie from the car. She paused, suddenly hesitant. Trusting kindness was unfamiliar territory, more frightening than darkness because disappointment hurt more than loneliness. Jonathan noticed her hesitation, his voice gentle. "It's okay to be afraid, but tonight, just trust enough to rest." Taking a deep breath, Maddie stepped forward, guided by Jonathan's steady hand into the comforting warmth of his home. For one fragile moment, hope whispered gently in her heart that perhaps she wasn't alone after all. Yet, as Jonathan closed the door behind them, neither noticed the shadowy figure hidden among the trees, watching intently, phone raised and ready. The house felt like a quiet refuge from the chaos that had chased Maddie and Grace all these months. Soft amber light spilled from lamps with lace curtains, and the faint smell of old books and wood smoke wrapped around them like a warm quilt. Jonathan moved with a gentle care Maddie hadn't expected, setting Grace down on a soft blanket spread across a worn rug. "Sit," he said quietly, his voice steady but kind. "You both need to rest." Maddie sank into an armchair near the fireplace, her hands trembling as she watched Grace curl up, finally peaceful. The baby's tiny fingers twitched in sleep, reminding Maddie of all the reasons she had fought to get this far. Her daughter's fragile life depending entirely on her. Jonathan poured them both a cup of tea, steam rising like a whispered promise between them. As Maddie sipped, she noticed the quiet pain etched in his face, like a hidden story waiting to be told. "Why did you really come to help me?" Maddie asked softly, breaking the silence. Jonathan hesitated, gaze falling to the floor. "Because I've been where you are. Not with a baby, but abandoned all the same. My mother was young, scared, and alone once too. She left me behind in a world that barely noticed." His words hung in the room like a fragile thread connecting their pasts. Two stories of abandonment and longing, separated by years but bound by shared pain. Maddie swallowed hard. "I never knew my father. My mom left when I was little. I was raised by strangers, never sure if I was loved or just tolerated." Jonathan's eyes softened. "That's why I can't turn away from you. Because I failed my own daughter. I want to do better this time." Maddie nodded slowly, the weight of their shared scars making her feel less alone than she had in years. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. One where fear wasn't the only companion, but just as hope began to settle, The phone on the kitchen counter rang sharply, slicing through the quiet. Jonathan's face tightened instantly as he exchanged a quick glance with Maddie. "I wasn't expecting anyone," he muttered, moving toward the phone. Maddie watched as his fingers hesitated over the receiver. "Hello?" he answered cautiously. Her voice on the other end was low, urgent. "Jonathan, they're closer than you think. You have to be ready." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "I'm doing everything I can. She's safe here." The line went dead. Jonathan's hand trembled slightly as he set the phone down, eyes darkening with resolve. Maddie felt the fragile bubble of safety pop. The shadow of danger was no longer outside the door. It was creeping inside, threatening to shatter the fragile peace they'd found. She looked at Jonathan, needing to know more. "Who are they? What are they after?" Jonathan met her gaze, his voice steady but filled with an unspoken warning. "People who want to take Grace from you. People who believe your story isn't worth a second chance." Maddie's heart clenched fiercely. The thought of losing her daughter, of being torn apart again, was unbearable. But in Jonathan's eyes, she saw something she hadn't dared to feel before. An ally, someone who understood the weight of a second chance. "We won't let that happen," he promised quietly. "Not while I'm here." Outside, the wind whispered against the windows, carrying with it a promise of storms yet to come. And then, a sudden crash echoed from the back door, a sound that shattered the silence and pulled Maddie's breath from her lungs. Maddie's heart thundered in her chest as Jonathan moved quickly toward the noise, eyes sharp and alert. Grace stirred in her sleep, sensing the sudden tension in the room. "The back door," Jonathan whispered, voice low but urgent. He glanced toward Maddie, silently telling her to stay quiet and keep the baby safe. Slowly, he crept toward the kitchen, the soft glow of the porch light casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Maddie followed hesitantly, clutching Grace, the baby's small hand curled tightly around her finger. Outside, the night was thick with darkness, but Jonathan could see faint footprints pressed into the damp earth near the back entrance. Someone had been there. He reached for the door handle, muscles tensed, then paused. The lock was intact, but a small window was cracked, enough for someone to peer inside. "Someone's watching us," he muttered, his voice tight with warning. Maddie swallowed hard, a cold shiver running down her spine. "Who?" she whispered. Jonathan shook his head slowly. "I don't know yet, but they're close, and they won't stop." Back inside, Jonathan's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message. "You can't hide her forever. We're coming." The message was chillingly clear. These weren't strangers making empty threats. They meant to take Grace away, to erase the fragile hope Maddie had fought so hard to build. Jonathan looked down at Grace sleeping peacefully in Maddie's arms. His jaw tightened with fierce determination. "We need a plan," he said, voice low but resolute. "And fast." Maddie nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of her own strength rising to meet the storm. For Grace, for herself, and for the chance at a new life, she would fight. But as they stood together in the dim kitchen light, neither noticed the small envelope tucked beneath the welcome mat outside the front door. An envelope that would change everything they thought they knew about the past. The envelope sat unnoticed beneath the welcome mat, crinkled and weathered, as if it had traveled a long way to reach this doorstep. Jonathan's sharp eyes caught the corner peeking out when he glanced toward the door. He bent down cautiously, fingers trembling slightly as he picked it up. Maddie watched him closely, sensing that whatever was inside could change the fragile thread holding their uneasy peace together. Jonathan's face paled as he broke the seal, unfolding a letter written in delicate, flowing handwriting, words that stirred memories buried deep beneath years of regret and silence. "My daughter," he whispered, voice catching. This is from her." Maddie's breath hitched. A letter from the daughter he had spent a lifetime searching for. Hope, long dormant, flickered fiercely in the dim room. Jonathan's hands shook as he read the letter aloud, each word a soft confession of pain and longing, a plea for forgiveness, and a desire to find the father she never truly knew. Maddie's eyes welled with tears, not just for Jonathan's story, but for her own. A young mother seeking a second chance in a world that often seemed too cruel for such hope. "This changes everything," Jonathan said finally, voice heavy with emotion. "She wants to meet me." "But what if it's a trap?" Maddie asked, fear threading her words. "What if the people outside are connected to this?" Jonathan looked up, resolve hardening his features. "Then we face it together." For the first time since arriving at this house, Maddie felt the stirrings of something she thought lost, trust. But as Jonathan folded the letter carefully, the lights flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness. When the soft glow returned, a shadow lingered in the hallway, someone standing just beyond the edge of the light. Neither Maddie nor Jonathan noticed. Outside, the night grew colder, and the quiet promise of safety began to unravel. The morning sun filtered softly through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the wooden floor. Maddie sat at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea warming her hands. But her mind was tangled in the night's revelations. Jonathan had called a number scrawled at the bottom of the letter. A woman's voice had answered, hesitant but hopeful. The plan to meet had been set, though Maddie worried the fragile thread of trust could snap at any moment. Grace gurgled happily on the blanket nearby, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the walls. Maddie smiled weakly, trying to hold on to the quiet moment. But beneath the surface, questions gnawed at her heart. Could a man who abandoned his daughter truly change? Could a mother afraid to trust again believe in second chances? Jonathan entered the room, his face softer in the morning light, yet shadows lingered behind his eyes. "I'm going to the meeting," he said quietly. "I have to know if she's real, if my daughter is really out there." Maddie nodded, though her stomach twisted with fear. "Be careful," she whispered. Jonathan reached out, briefly touching Maddie's hand, a silent promise of protection, of solidarity in the unknown journey ahead. As he left, Maddie settled by the window, watching the world wake slowly. She clung to a fragile hope, but the weight of the past pressed heavy against the walls. Hours passed, stretching into an endless wait. Then, the phone rang. Jonathan's voice was tense, strained. "She's not who I expected." Maddie's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "There's more to this story," he said. "Something they're not telling us." Before he could explain further, the line went dead. Outside, the wind whispered secrets through the trees, and Maddie felt the first true chill of fear settle deep inside her bones. The line went dead, leaving Maddie clutching the phone as silence pressed in like a suffocating fog. Her mind raced, heart pounding with a mix of dread and fierce determination. Jonathan wasn't the type to be shaken easily. If his voice trembled, then the danger lurking behind this reunion was far worse than she had imagined. Minutes dragged by, each one heavy with unanswered questions. Grace stirred on the blanket nearby, a gentle reminder of the fragile life depending on them both. Maddie drew a shaky breath, steadying herself for whatever lay ahead. Jonathan finally returned home that evening, his face pale but resolute. He carried with him a folder thick with documents and photographs, pieces of a puzzle that tangled their fates more tightly than either had expected. "They lied," he said quietly, lowering himself into the worn armchair. "The woman in the letter isn't my daughter. She's someone else entirely, a woman with her own reasons for reaching out." Maddie's hands tightened around her cup. "But why? Why send a letter if it's not true?" Jonathan shook his head slowly. "To lure me out of hiding, to find Grace. They want the baby, Maddie, not me." Her chest tightened with a cold, fierce protectiveness. "We can't let that happen." Jonathan's eyes softened as he looked at Maddie. "You're stronger than you know, and I'm going to do everything to keep you both safe." He opened the folder, revealing a series of photographs. In each, a shadowy figure appeared, watching, waiting, never quite stepping into the light. "They've been following you," Jonathan said grimly. "For months." Maddie swallowed hard, memories flooding back. The sudden knocks, the mysterious phone calls, the feeling of eyes watching every step. "We have to disappear," Jonathan said. "For Grace's sake." But before Maddie could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Both froze. Jonathan's hand moved instinctively to a small drawer in the kitchen, pulling out a worn, leather-bound book. A journal. "Keep this safe," he said urgently. "It holds the key to everything." The door creaked open slowly. A voice whispered from the threshold, "You can't run forever, Jonathan." The figure stepped inside, shadowed and unreadable. Maddie's breath hitched, clutching Grace tighter as Jonathan rose slowly, eyes fierce but wary. "Who are you?" Jonathan demanded, voice low but steady. The visitor's face emerged into the warm glow of the kitchen light. A woman, mid-30s, eyes sharp but tired. "I'm someone who knows the truth," she said calmly. "About your past, about the baby, about the people chasing you." Maddie's heart pounded. Could she trust this stranger? Could Jonathan? The woman took a deep breath. "My name is Evelyn. I worked with social services until I uncovered things I shouldn't have, things that put my life at risk." Jonathan's gaze hardened. "What things?" Evelyn glanced at Grace, then back to Maddie. "There's a network. People who take children away, not because it's best for them, but for profit, for power." Maddie's eyes filled with tears. "They want to take Grace," Evelyn nodded solemnly. "And they'll stop at nothing to do it." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "Then we fight. Together." Evelyn reached into her bag, pulling out a small flash drive. "This has everything you need. Evidence, names, locations. But you must be careful. They're watching." Maddie swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment. For all their pain and fear, a fragile hope now bloomed. Jonathan looked at Maddie, voice steady. "We'll build a family, not just by blood, but by trust and courage." Outside, the wind rustled the trees again, carrying the promise of battles yet to come. And somewhere, unseen, the shadowy figures waited. The house was quiet now, but the tension hung heavy in the air like a thick fog. Maddie held Grace close, feeling the baby's steady heartbeat beneath her fingers, a fragile reminder of everything worth fighting for. Jonathan sat across the room, staring at the flash drive Evelyn had handed over, a small object carrying the weight of so many secrets. "We can't stay here," Jonathan said quietly. "They know this place. It won't be safe for long." Maddie nodded, exhaustion tugging at her limbs, but a stubborn spark burned inside her. "Where can we go?" Jonathan looked out the window toward the darkening woods. "I have a cabin upstate, remote, no phone, no internet. We can disappear for a while, gather strength." As they packed what little they had, Evelyn moved silently around the room, organizing papers and whispering instructions. Her presence was steady, a calm in the storm. Before they left, Evelyn handed Maddie a worn locket. "This belonged to your mother," she said softly. "It might help you find peace." Maddie traced the delicate engraving, feeling a sudden connection to the mother she barely remembered. On the road, the silence was thick, but not uncomfortable. Grace slept peacefully, oblivious to the danger and hope intertwining in the world around her. Jonathan's voice broke the quiet. "You're stronger than you realize, Maddie. Not because you have to be, but because you choose to be." Maddie met his eyes, the warmth there like a balm for her wounded soul. As the cabin's worn door closed behind them, the night outside seemed less frightening. Inside, the flicker of a single candle cast dancing shadows, promising new beginnings. But deep in the woods, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the moment to strike. The cabin was small but filled with the quiet comfort of solitude. Maddie rocked Grace gently, the baby's soft coos mingling with the crackle of the fireplace. Jonathan sat nearby, sifting through the files on the flash drive, searching for a way to unravel the network threatening their fragile family. Evelyn paced, phone pressed to her ear, her voice low but urgent. "We need allies, people who won't turn away when they see what we're up against." Maddie looked around the room, the faces of her small makeshift family shining softly in the firelight. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. Suddenly, a loud knock shattered the quiet. All three froze. Jonathan moved quickly to the door, peering through the window. No one was there. But then, a package lay on the doorstep. Evelyn retrieved it carefully, opening it to reveal a photograph, one Maddie knew too well. It was a picture of her mother, younger, smiling softly, standing beside a man Jonathan recognized instantly. "Who is he?" Maddie whispered. Jonathan's face tightened. "That's my father." A silence fell over the room, thick with unspoken histories and wounds. Maddie clutched Grace tighter, feeling the weight of the past pressing closer. Evelyn's voice was steady but heavy. "The past isn't done with us yet." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying secrets that would soon demand answers. The photograph lingered on the table between them, a silent witness to tangled histories and unspoken truths. Maddie stared at the faces frozen in time, her mother's gentle smile, and the man Jonathan called his father, a figure wrapped in shadows and regret. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Maddie's voice was barely a whisper, heavy with years of questions that had never found answers. Jonathan's gaze dropped, fingers tracing the edge of the photo. "Because I was afraid that opening the past would bring more pain than healing. But now, I see that hiding won't protect us anymore." Evelyn nodded solemnly. Sometimes the only way forward is through the darkness. As night deepened, the cabin became a sanctuary of shared stories and fragile trust. Jonathan revealed memories of a lonely childhood, a father lost to his own demons, and a mother who had tried and failed to hold their fractured family together. Maddie shared her own story, the abandonment, the fear, the desperate hope that Grace might one day know love unconditionally. Between them, a quiet understanding blossomed. Their scars, once isolating, now bound them together like a patchwork quilt, sewn with threads of resilience. But outside, the shadows lengthened. A car's headlights pierced the darkness beyond the tree line, moving slowly toward the cabin. Inside, none heard the faint crunch of gravel beneath tires or the soft click of a door unlocking. They were no longer alone. The sudden creak of the front door breaking open shattered the fragile peace of the cabin. Jonathan's hand shot to the small knife he kept in his pocket, muscles tensed and ready. Maddie pulled Grace closer, heart pounding, the baby's innocent eyes wide with confusion. A figure stepped inside, familiar yet unexpected. It was the woman from the letter, the one who had lured Jonathan into this web of lies and danger. Her smile was cold, practiced, but her eyes held a flicker of something more. Regret, perhaps, or fear. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said softly. "But they're watching. They're ruthless." Jonathan's voice was steady but hard. "Who are they? What do they want?" She glanced around nervously before answering. "The people running the network want control. Control of children like Grace, children they see as commodities." Maddie's grip tightened around her daughter. "We won't let them take her." The woman nodded slowly. "There's one way out, one way to stop them, but it means risking everything." Jonathan exchanged a look with Maddie, the weight of impossible choices pressing down. As the woman stepped closer, the fire flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of battles yet to be fought. And outside, the world held its breath. The firelight flickered softly, casting warm shadows across the worn wooden walls of the cabin. Maddie held Grace close, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, a quiet lullaby in a world that had been anything but gentle. Jonathan sat nearby, his eyes reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and hope, the weight of their journey etched into every line on his face. The woman's words hung in the air, heavy with the truth they all feared, yet knew was real. The network that sought to tear them apart was relentless, but so was their determination to protect the fragile family they had become. In the quiet moments that followed, Jonathan reached out, taking Maddie's hand in his. A simple gesture, but one filled with the promise of presence and protection. They were no longer just two strangers bound by circumstance. They were a family, imperfect and fragile, but real. Outside, the night whispered its secrets, but inside, a fragile peace settled, a second chance at love, at safety, at belonging. Some stories don't end with grand declarations or perfect endings. They end with a cradle rocking gently in the corner, a baby's soft sigh, and two people finally finding a place where they can sleep without fear. Miss Martha's voice, warm and steady, closes softly. "If this story has found a small corner in your heart, leave a word, won't you? The porch light here at Second Cradle stays on, for you, always." And with that, the door closes gently. The night deepens, and hope endures.